Hi, welcome to Random Scottish History's Scottish Railway Incidents readings for May 1900. If you've watched the first 4 episodes, then you'll be aware of the trigger warnings, lots of gruesome incidents, particularly descriptive in some cases. So if you feel like you're a little bit sensitive to just particularly gruesome and gory details, it's maybe not for you. The headlines tend to give it away a wee bit. You're going to find repetition because further articles are going to have extra information for earlier incidents. Perhaps someone succumbed a few days after the fact, or maybe there's just extra information in the way of addresses and names and things. There's also going to be mispronunciations of both names and places because there are a lot of both. So I will just get into May 1900, I think.
Let's do it.
Go for it, love.
Okay, so first up, Devon Valley Tribune, Tuesday, 1st of May, distressing occurrence on the railway. A case of alleged suicide took place last week, the details regarding which are particularly distressing. James Miller, 62 years of age and married, a retired publican residing at 46 Oakhill Street, was seen on Thursday forenoon walking along the railway about 3/4 of a mile east of Telegraph station. The train from Telegraph to Dollar and Perth was due, and on its coming up, Miller is said to have deliberately thrown himself in front of the engine and been killed instantaneously. Deceased was found lying on the 4-foot way in a terrible mangled condition, and his remains were removed to his house in Oakhill Street. Much sympathy is felt for his widow and son in their sudden and unexpected bereavement. Probably also because they just had somebody knock on the door and, like, you know, give them all the body parts and whatnot. Like, it'd be quite distressing in itself.
Yeah. I haven't been able to find very much in the way of information suggesting there was any mitigation of bodies brought back to their families. At this point, it tended to be the elder women of the family, the mothers and grandmothers, possibly elder daughters if they were old enough to help. They would be responsible for preparing the bodies of their family members for burial. So people would be found all cut up on the line because they've maybe been hit by successive trains. Those parts were put in a bag and they were brought to the family's homes. Were they cleaned up first? I don't know that I've come across any information to suggest that.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, well, I mean, suicide as well. That's pretty dark, but
Yeah, 62 years of age too. Like.
Yeah. We still get this happening nowadays, of course, but nasty.
So next we have from the Falkirk Herald of Wednesday the 2nd of May, the Falkirk Railway Fatality. On Saturday afternoon, the remains of William Jameson, the Montrose lad who was killed by a train at Falkirk on Tuesday, were interred at Sleepy Hillock Cemetery, Montrose. The funeral was attended by many friends and acquaintances. Amongst several beautiful wreaths was one subscribed for by employees at Victoria Sawmills, where he wrought before joining the railway service, and the members of the Sawmillers Rowing Club. He was one of the club's most successful coxswains, and 8 members of crews whom he had piloted to victory at regattas there and Aberdeen paid a last tribute to his memory by carrying the coffin from the hearse to the grave. So that's just to round up an article maybe from last month's roundup.
Yeah, you can tell because there's a lot more information on the victim for the follow-up. So next we got Edinburgh Evening News, Thursday 3rd of May, the recent Haymarket tunnel fatality. Inquiry was held into the circumstances attending the deaths of Alexander Pontoon, a railway surfaceman, and Robert Shaw, a pipe layer, who on the 18th of last month were run down and killed by an engine in the Princes Street Gardens in close proximity to the Haymarket tunnel. A surfaceman named Patrick Maguire said he did not see a passenger train pass, although it was due at the time when the engine passed. Pontoon was standing with his back to the engine and Shaw with his face towards it, but the witness gave it as his opinion that as Shaw was a much smaller man than Pontoon, he might not have observed the engine coming along. Pontoon was struck on the head by the engine and knocked across to the opposite line of rails, while he saw Shaw lying on the same line of rails as that on which the engine had passed. Cross-examined, witnesses said that, practically speaking, Ponton stood and watched so that he might give warning to the men. It was pointed out to his lordship that Shaw was not employed there, but was proceeding along the railway to Fountain Bridge. Formal verdicts were returned in each instance. Sounds like a bit of a mix-up there.
That's just the court case to try and ascertain exactly how the thing happened and who, if anyone, was responsible. Edinburgh Evening News from Friday the 4th of May. Accident on the railway near Coatbridge. A man named Patrick Lafferty, 50 years old, from Carnborough, has been found on the Caledonian Railway between Whifflet and Coatbridge in an unconscious condition. He was attended by Dr. MacPhail, who stated that the man's skull was fractured and ordered him removed to the Alexandra Hospital. It is not known how the man met with the accident. Might have a wee later article adding to that.
So for our next one, we've got Forfar Herald, Friday 4th of May, miraculous escape on the railway. On Monday evening, James Millison, a cattle drover, had a very narrow escape on the Kirriemuir branch of the Caledonian Railway. About half a mile to the east of Kirriemuir Station, Mollison, who was walking on the line, was overtaken by the Arbroath train, which reaches Kirriemuir at 7 o'clock in a deep curved cutting and knocked down by the engine. On the arrival of the train, an engine and carriage were dispatched to his assistance, when it was found he had sustained but little injury. He was advised by the railway officials to proceed to Forfar Infirmary for examination, and for this purpose he was seated in the outgoing train and dispatched to Forfar. So,
seems like he got away with it.
Nah, this is one of the rare instances where they just get a bit of a hit and then just go to the doctors, you know.
Yep.
Nice for a change.
Dundee Courier, Sunday the 5th of May, shocking accident at Aberdeen. Yesterday afternoon, John Adams, shunter, Rosebank Place, Aberdeen, while employed at his vacation at Aberdeen Joint Railway Station, slipped and fell on the rails. The wheels of several vehicles of the train he was shunting passed over both his legs, which were fractured. He was removed to the Royal Infirmary, where he succumbed to his injuries. Shunting accident.
He would have definitely lost those legs even if he had survived as well.
Yeah, I would think so.
So next up we have Airdrie and Coatbridge Advertiser, Saturday the 5th of May, with no title. Rather a startling affair is to be brought before the Justice of Peace Court next week. Two young lads are to be charged with wickedly, wilfully and maliciously placing and fixed by means of an iron spike across the metals of the railway at Longreg End a wooden fencing rail to the danger of life and detriment of traffic. The youngsters are said to have gone on the bridge after fixing up the obstruction to watch the result as a heavily laden train came along.
That's pretty psychopathic behaviour from children right there.
Yeah, that's homicidal behaviour right there. It's a wicked, willful and malicious all simultaneously.
Well, they've literally not just put the wedding fencing rail across the line like you might expect. They fixed it there with metal spikes.
Yeah, just hammered it into
to
place.
To make sure that it wasn't going anywhere. And then stood up to just wait for it to go.
Just how old they are? Too young, just like young lads.
I feel like they probably made it into the papers quite a number of times later in life for other things possibly.
Yeah, after a bad start.
Seems like they're delinquents.
There's a book to read right now.
So, next from the North British Daily Mail, dated Monday the 7th of May, we have an accident on the West Highland Railway. So on Saturday evening, an accident occurred on the West Highland Railway, which caused much damage to rolling stock. The 4:20 through train from Fort William to Glasgow arrived safely at Ariker, where a couple of empty carriages were attached. It is stated that the driver of the train, John Thornton, got the permit tablet from the signalman, and believing the line to be clear, he proceeded south. The points, however, leading to the siding seemed to have been open, and before the driver realised that he had left the main line, the engine dashed into the stationary buffers, carrying them away. The engine overturned on the embankment, and the tender becoming detached fell on the main line, completely blocking it. The first carriage was fortunately empty, as it was badly damaged. The second was also damaged. The driver was much bruised about the head and face, and the freeman had his hand badly lacerated. Although some alarm was caused among the passengers in the other carriages which kept the metals, no one was hurt. A doctor who happened to be in the train and a local medical man attended to the injuries of the driver and fireman. Mr. Purvis, the Helensburgh station master, with great promptitude made up a relief train and proceeded to Ariker and brought off the passengers who arrived at Glasgow about 3 hours late. A breakdown gang from Cowlairs under Mr. Sutherland reached the scene of the accident about 11 p.m. and worked through the night up till yesterday afternoon, when the men, being thoroughly worn out, had to cease operations. The main line had by that time been cleared and the tender put on the metals. The engine has yet to be lifted and operations will be resumed today. 2 engines and a travelling crane were on the scene of the accident. The operations were under the charge of Inspector Davidson. Inquiry at Queen Street Station elicited few facts to throw light on the accident. The relief train, which was dispatched from Helensburgh to the scene of the accident, arrived in Glasgow shortly after midnight. Passengers bound for Edinburgh were sent on by special train from Cowlairs. Though the accident caused a good deal of momentary alarm among the passengers, not a single one was injured, and no great inconvenience was caused by the delay, except in the case of 3 or 4 people whose destinations were Paisley, Hamilton and some outlying places, and who, of course, missed the late local connecting trains. The engine driver was the only one who sustained injuries, and they were of so slight a nature that he announced his intention of returning in to duty today. The breakdown gang, which left Cowlairs under Inspector Davidson, immediately on receipt of the news of the accident, got the line expeditiously repaired and the damaged rolling stock ready for transit. Regarding the cause of the mishap, there seems to be no doubt that the siding points were open, but no opinion is vouchsafed by the Glasgow officials as to how this came to be so. So there we go.
A lot of descriptions in that one. I quite liked the line, was it the Helensburgh station master attended with great promptitude.
Great promptitude. That's it. He had
Don't
good presence of mind.
Don't use language like that anymore. Imagine that you phone in a taxi. How soon is it going to be? It will be with you with great promptitude. Oh, thank you, my good sir. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So next up we got Edinburgh Evening News, Monday 7th of May. Railway accident at Portobello. Yesterday morning, a somewhat serious occurrence took place on the North British Railway between Niddrie and Portobello stations. A goods train, which was coming from Newcastle, was owing to the signals being against it, slowly moving along when a pilot engine coming in the same direction dashed into it, with the result that the guards van and several of the wagons were thrown off the rails and severely damaged. 2 guards, William Crosby and John Hune, who were in the van, had a very narrow escape. Both were bruised and cut about the head and had to be removed to the station where their wounds were dressed. Man, a head-on collision. It seems like they got quite lucky, only
I would consider that an escape. Like,
it's definitely an escape. I mean, they hurt themselves, but, I've read a lot of these articles now. I think they were probably quite lucky, really.
I think they probably consider themselves quite lucky too. Next one from the Scotsman, Tuesday the 8th of May. A bullock throws a train off the rails at Reston. On Sunday, a bullock, which was grazing in an adjoining field, strayed onto the North British Railway near Reston while a goods train was approaching, into the way of which it got. The animal was knocked down and killed, while several wagons were thrown off the line. A gang of workmen from Berwick having arrived, the wagons were replaced after some delay, and the train proceeded. It's a shame for the bullock.
It's a wee shame, aye.
But it didn't seem to slow down the trains any, so...
Yeah, livestock just sort of wandering about, less fences and whatnot. I imagine that probably happened quite a lot. Probably didn't always, I can't imagine they would have mentioned it in the newspapers all that often. Because a lot of the time it just been knocked off the track and then they just kept going.
There's quite a lot of reports of animals ending up on the lines getting hit, yeah.
Oh well, watch this
or narrowly missed.
Cool. So next up we got Edinburgh Evening News, Tuesday 8th of May, the prevention of railway accidents. The Standing Committee of the House of Commons on Trade yesterday began the consideration of the Railway Preventions of Accidents Bill. On Clause 1, an amendment allowing railway companies a reasonable amount of time to carry out the requirements of the rules to be made by the Board of Trade was agreed to after discussion. Clause 1 and a number of subsequent clauses were adopted, and an amendment to Clause 2 was under consideration when further proceedings were adjourned till Thursday. Among other amendments agreed to after discussion was one providing that the Board of Trade might require the use of any plant or appliance which had been shown to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade to be calculated to reduce danger to persons employed on a railway, or the disuse of any plant or appliance which had been similarly shown to involve danger.
I assume that would go towards the automatic couplings being adopted fairly quickly then?
A continuation of the safety
for shunting,
procedures. I have to be honest, I didn't really take a lot of that in, because that was some long sentences right there, So progress is good though.
Yes, positive signs towards preventing the accidents to railway employers and customers. The next is for the North British Daily Mail, dated Tuesday the 8th of May. Clyde Bank, fatal accident. At 3 a.m. on Sunday, a man was found on the 4-foot way of the down line of the North British Railway at Kilbowie by the signalman William Coulter. He had been knocked down by a passing goods train. He was alive when found, but died shortly after. He was identified as Alexander Chamber, 28 years, mason, 9 Graham Street, Clydebank, and he leaves a widow and 5 of a family. Didn't say how he managed to get himself hit or what he might have been doing at the time, but there you go.
Shunting.
I don't know that he was even a railway worker, was he?
It's passing goods train.
He's
probably getting off the line from one train
guy.
And jumped into the other line.
that's a good shout. Yeah, it happens a lot.
So next up, Coatbridge Express, Wednesday 9th of May. Mysterious railway accident. As reported in our Saturday's issue, a man named Patrick Lafferty, residing at Brewsterford, was picked up on the Caledonian Low-Level Railway between Coatbridge and Whifflet about 11 o'clock on Thursday night in an unconscious condition. Dr McPhail stated that the man's skull was fractured and ordered his removal to the Alexander Hospital. The unfortunate man is said to have left Holytown with the 9:30 train due at Whifflet at 10:04 on the night of the accident, and is supposed to have fallen or left the train before the station was reached. Lafferty succumbed to his injuries about 10 o'clock on Friday night.
Is that what you say? The next from the Scotsman, Thursday 10th of May. A sitting of the High Court of Justiciary was held at Glasgow yesterday, Lords Young and Kincairney being the presiding judges. In the Old Court before Lord Young, principal interest centred in the case of James Rintoul, a railway signalman who was charged with culpable homicide. We'll maybe remember this story before from the Queen Street Charing Cross tunnel accident. The indictment was to the effect that on the 28th of March, when acting as signalman at Charing Cross Station, Glasgow, Rintoul, having accepted the 5:45 a.m. workman's train from Bridgeton Cross to Kilbowie, and that train being still in the tunnel, accepted the 6 a.m. workman's train from Bridgeton Cross to Kilbowie by signalling to James Milne, signalman at Queen Street West Low Level, that the line was clear, and so caused Milne to allow the second train to enter the tunnel and collide with the first, whereby 7 workmen were killed. Rintoul pleaded not guilty. In the course of the evidence it was stated that after the accident Rintoul admitted he had been making a cup of tea. He must have forgotten that the 5:45 a.m. train had not passed. Lord Young, in his summing up, remarked that the chief cause of the disaster was the brakes of the first train being in bad order and causing the train to stop in the tunnel. The jury, after an absence of 50 minutes, found the prisoner not guilty. They desired to express their regret that the company's rule with regard to the placing of detonators on the line in such circumstances had not been observed, and they further expressed their sense of importance of the brakes in connection with such trains being frequently and efficiently supervised. Lord Young expressed his entire concurrence with the verdict. So I was feeling quite sorry for Mr. Rintoul the last time, because I felt like there was no way he could get away with that. If it was his job to notice that the train had or hadn't passed, and he failed in that duty, then he was probably culpable. But there he's been found not guilty, so...
Well, sometimes you just need a cup of tea. Also, that's like super local, that's like right there. Like
it is.
Reston Cross State.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up, Barhead News, Friday 11th of May, railway accident. An accident occurred at Neilston Station last week by which Bernard Rodden, a goods guard, met with a severe injury while engaged in shunting, his right foot being almost severed and his head injured. Dr. W.A. Pride was in immediate attendance and had the poor man removed to the Royal Infirmary, an express train due at the time being stopped for the purpose. Another shunter.
Women shunting. Yep. Next is from the Alloa Advertiser, Saturday the 12th of May, with a fatal railway accident. A painful railway accident resulting fatally took place on Thursday forenoon near Cambus. Kenneth McLennan, 78 years of age, a widower and a retired railway servant residing with Mr. Robert Fraser, clerk, Cambus, was on Thursday forenoon taking a walk by New Mills Farm, and when crossing the level crossing there, he evidently did not observe a train coming along and was knocked down by the 10:35 a.m. cattle train from Stirling to Dunfermline. He was instantly killed, and his body was afterwards taken home in a mutilated condition. So that's where your Green Cross code might have helped, look both ways before crossing the road.
Yeah, and the listen part as well.
It seems yeah, I'm not sure how you could miss a train coming, especially if you're crossing a level crossing.
I mean, that's like your one consideration,
It's
like when crossing
whether
a level
train
crossing.
is coming, so
Yeah,
how
and
do
it's
you
not-
not notice? Like,
I mean,
maybe you didn't hear it and it was coming around a corner?
Yeah, it just seems unlikely because like a lot of these stories is another train coming on the other line, and that's why they don't hear it. This one, it was just one train by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that
This
one.
Okay, so next up we've got Alloa Journal, Saturday 12th of May, man killed on the railway. About midnight on Saturday, the dead body of John Crichton, 17-year-old labourer residing at Alloa Junction Cottages, was found lying on the railway about half a mile south of Alloa Junction. Deceased was on his way home and had been knocked down by a passing train, the head and upper part of the body being much mutilated. His father is employed on the railway at Stirling. Aye.
I'd have been sad about that then.
Yeah. Seems like it took a minute to get found as well.
Next is from the Scotsman, Monday the 14th of May. A very sad railway accident occurred yesterday morning at Greenick, which resulted in the death of 4 men. An engine and tender left Prince's Pier for Glasgow at an early hour. At Cartsburn Junction, the signalman, by some unfortunate misunderstanding, turned the engine from the main line onto the short line leading down to the James Watt dock. The engine was running at a high rate of speed, as on the main line there was a 4 miles incline to take, while on the branch line there was a sharp decline. Speedily reaching the end of this branch, the engine leapt all obstacles, and falling on soft ground was buried to the funnel, while the tender was tipped on end. On the engine with the driver and stoker were 2 men not yet identified, who, having missed the last train on Saturday night, were being favoured with a run to Glasgow. 3 of the men were killed instantaneously, and the driver died in a few minutes after he'd been extricated. This is an incident that's carried over into future articles. This was quite a significant incident to have happened out Greenock Way, and it was the first that I came across where there were illustrations to go alongside of it in the newspapers. Alex did his own version of that
there was a photos
for the
of
publication.
It.
People would rush to scenes like this to take photos and then sell those photos. So there were quite a lot of adverts in successive publications advertising photos of this particular scene in Greenock.
Yeah, it's not particularly tasteful, but you can understand, I suppose,
Well,
as a spectacle,
I found someone on, I don't know if it was a Hidden Glasgow forum, but someone actually had one of the photos of this incident, and he was wondering where it had occurred, what had happened, so I was able to fill him in on that and give him some of the newspaper reports of the incident, which is pretty interesting. But it was a particularly big smash because the train has literally, instead of having to go up an incline, therefore it's going quite fast, it's going really fast down in a decline that they weren't expecting. It's gone through the buffer because this was into just a wee siding to deliver things to the pier. It's just gone through all of that because it was going way too fast, and it's got airborne, and then it's smashed into like a mud bank. So it's mostly submerged, and the furnace in the train spilled onto the fireman, the engine driver. It was just a horrific scene. There's witness testimony coming up later that goes into really how bad this particular event was.
Yeah, it's like some Dukes of Hazzard stuff. This train flying through the air and then just burying itself into this mud. But it looks like we've got a follow-up. So the Greenock railway smash here. Dundee Evening Telegraph, Monday the 14th of May, identifying the victims. The two passengers killed in the railway accident yesterday have been identified as James Kyle, 30 years old, labourer, married, 73 Maitland Street, Glasgow, and James McVeigh, 30 years old, dealer, married, 56 Rose Street, Glasgow. Both men had been to Greenick on Saturday, seeing the Channel fleet, and missing the train or getting a run home. The engine has not been lifted yet. Railway experts cannot understand why the driver did not stop when he saw he was on the wrong line. He had a powerful brake.
It was really, when you're saying it was early in the morning, we're talking like it was like 1-2 o'clock in the morning. So it would have been dark. Places weren't particularly well lit. I don't know that the engine driver would have immediately realised that he was on the wrong line, just for how dark it was. Also, they had taken the two passengers mentioned weren't supposed to be on the train. This was a train that was just being brought back by railway employees, and they've graciously allowed these couple of people who have
guys
ended
have stuck
up,
their thumb out and a train stopped, you know.
they've been left behind, dying to get back Glasgow way, so the employees let them, and
took sympathy. It's maybe also like because they're not used to having more folks on the railway, like on the train itself, like they might have just been chatting away. Yeah. Maybe overlooked it. Yeah. Something as simple
just
as that.
Distracted. Because later articles do try in some way to have a bit of a go at the railway employees for even allowing these people on the train, but it wouldn't have made any difference to this accident. Really, the issue came from the pointsman having opened up the wrong lines. It was the wrong points that were open for the train to go down. So this continues. We have quite a big article here that really goes into descriptions of it with witness testimony and what have you, from naturally the Greenick Telegraph and Clyde Shipping Gazette, dated Monday the 14th of May. This article is a few headings. Terrible railway accident at Greenick, engine jumps over an embankment, 4 men killed, horrible death scenes. A deplorable accident, almost unprecedented in the history of the Greenick section of the Glasgow and South Western Railway, took place on the branch line near Inchgreen Gasworks early yesterday morning, when an engine ran over the embankment, resulting in the death of 4 men. Hitherto, the railway in this district has enjoyed immunity from serious accident, and the present is the most distressing that has happened since the opening of the line in 1869. The scene of the disaster was the terminus of the railway embankment nearly opposite Inchgreen Gasworks. The branch line is about 2 miles in length and joins the main line near Cartsdyke Station, having been constructed by the company some 12 or 14 years ago in connection with the opening of the James Watt dock for shipping traffic. The branch, it may also be mentioned, crosses the Port Glasgow Road a little to the east of Ladyburn Parish Church, and the gradient from the junction to this point is a steep one of 1 in 55. The circumstances attending the melancholy affair are as follows. Throughout the whole of Saturday afternoon there was an extraordinary passenger traffic between Prince's Pier and St Enoch stations, consequent on the visit of the Channel fleet to Greenock, and a special engine was employed in bringing down empty carriages in order to meet the great volume of business which had to be dealt with. The engine, number 358, was detailed to proceed with a train of empty carriages from Glasgow to Greenick, arriving here shortly after midnight. On the completion of this duty, and after attending to other arrangements, the two men in charge of the engine took their departure for Glasgow at 2:20 yesterday morning, under the ordinary signals. Accompanying them on the footplate, although this is strictly prohibited by the rules of the company, were two passengers who had boarded the engine, unobserved by the officials. In the usual course, the engine was belled on for Cartsburn Junction, and everything seems to have proceeded smoothly till nearing that point. The signalman there, it is said, on observing the engine, assumed that it was a local one to work at the James Watt dock in connection with the anchor liner City of Rome, which was due there last night. He accordingly, it is alleged, opened the points and sent it on to the Inchgreen branch. On approaching the signal box near the junction, the engine was going at a great rate, and there the driver gave a blast of the whistle which indicated that he meant to proceed along the main line. The signalman, John Laurie, who resides in Prospect Hill Street, Greenock, then noticed the error that had been made. But the engine was travelling at too high a speed to attempt to change the points, as in that case there was a serious risk of throwing the engine over the bridge onto the Kilmacombe Road. He could, therefore, it is explained, do nothing but allow the locomotive to pass on to the branch line, expecting that the driver would stop as soon as he discovered that he had been put on the wrong road, and return to the main line. As the engine did not reappear, he informed the officials at Prince's Pier of the occurrence in order that inquiry might be made. There is considerable speculation as to how the driver did not detect that he was on the wrong line. In the first place, instead of running down an incline, the engine should have been going uphill, while there is also the further fact that every second it was nearing a well-lighted locality, whereas the proper route was through an agricultural district. Then there is the further circumstance that, under the locking system, a train could not be put on the branch without the main line signal being against it, and vice versa. It is believed by some that the driver failed to notice that the signal was against him. Be the cause what it may, the engine and its occupants had passed on to their doom. Careering down the incline at a terrific rate, the noise being heard for some distance around, the engine sped through the bridge over the Port Glasgow Road, rounded the curve at the east end of the James Watt dock, cleared the points, and, dashing aside the check sleepers at the terminus of the line, plunged over the embankment. The tremendous speed at which it must have been going is shown by the fact that both the engine and the tender cleared a distance of over 80 feet, and that in falling the former buried itself at the front fully 15 feet in the bank of the old timber pond. Some of the night staff in the gasworks nearby were early on the scene, and a startling sight presented itself. The tender, which had followed the engine, lay at an angle of about 75 degrees at the foot on the embankment. Its contents filled the firebox, where the poor occupants, being thrown against the furnace, were literally burned to death. 3 of the men were completely buried under the coal, while the 4th, supposed to be the driver, was only partially covered. On arriving, the men from the gasworks immediately set to work with a view to rescuing the victims, but their attempts to extricate them were rendered fruitless by the volumes of scalding steam and the intense heat from the burning coal, which prevented them from remaining any length of time near the spot. Time and again efforts at rescue were made, but all to no purpose. At length the driver, who appeared to be the only one still alive, was reached, but he had only strength left to ask his rescuers to shut off the steam. Shortly afterwards he expired. Information of the occurrence was at once dispatched to Mr. Kerr, the station master at Prince's Pier, Mr. McCracken, the station master at Bogston, Mr. William Aitken, traffic inspector at Greenock, and other officials. The services of a number of surfacemen and of some workmen at the James Watt dock were obtained, and after the steam had spent itself, the victims were extricated from the debris. They presented a shocking sight, their bodies being charred and burned quite beyond recognition, and identification could only be made by remnants of their clothing, and also by some small articles found about their persons. It was 6 o'clock before all the bodies were got out, and they were then conveyed in a van to the police mortuary in Dalrymple Street. Here the remains were laid out on stretchers to await identification. In order to assist in that, the driver and fireman were laid at one end of the room and the others at the opposite side. Their distorted figures presented a gruesome spectacle, and the way in which their limbs were twisted showed that their death must have been a terrible one. Later in the afternoon, 3 of the bodies were identified, namely Alexander Gibson, 29 years old, engineer, 87 Neyburn Street, Glasgow, married, no family. John Glendinning, Jr., 18 years old, fireman, 256 Cumberland Street, Glasgow. His parents reside in Ardrossan, the father being a railway guard. And J. Kyle, Glasgow. The only means of identification in this case was a membership card of the Caledonian Club and Institute Glasgow found in his pocket, bearing the name J. Kyle, 103. Thrilling narrative by an eyewitness. Mr. John Gordon, one of the night staff at Inchgreen Gasworks and residing at 97 Port Glasgow Road, was the only eyewitness of the occurrence. In the course of an interview yesterday afternoon with a Telegraph representative, he said, "At the time of the accident I was standing near one of the gas holders. I had heard a noise, and thinking this was caused by someone who had no right to be about the premises, I went out to see who it was. Just then I heard an engine coming, and in a few seconds it swept round the curve at the north end of the bridge. When I saw it, I thought it was a runaway engine and that it had been sent down here to prevent it doing damage to any other place. I tried to see if there were any men on board, but the engine was travelling so quickly I could not discern anyone. In a moment it passed me, and I stood and watched it going down. When it came to the sleepers, it sent them spinning like matchwood. The engine made a leap into the hollow. I then ran into the gasworks and gave the alarm that there was an engine over the bank. By the time I got in, some of the other workers heard the noise and were coming out. I went in for help, and on returning to the scene, the other men were trying to rescue the only one who was alive. He was supposed to be the engine driver. When he spoke, they started to try and get him out from among the coal, but the steam got the better of them and drove them away. We went back 2 or 3 minutes later, but were again forced to retire. Returning afterwards, we found the man dead. It seemed then to us there was no more use trying to fight against the steam, knowing the men were all gone. My shift was up at 6 o'clock, and they were then digging out the bodies. At first we could only make out 3 of the men. 2 were jammed on the one side of the engine, and the other, who was supposed to be the driver, was huddled up on the right-hand side. The 4th man was buried altogether under the coal. Judging from the speed the engine was going at from the time it left the junction at Cartsburn to the time it reached the embankment, it must only have been about 3 minutes on the road, a distance of fully 2 miles. It is my belief that the men never knew where they were going. When the engine came round the curve, it was travelling at the rate of over 60 miles an hour, and the rails seemed to be in flames, although the brake did not appear to be on. The sparks were flying off the rails. The men never gave any sign, but even if they had cried out, you could not have heard them because of the noise the engine was making. When we were trying to rescue the men, the driver called out to us, "Shut off the steam." We could not do so, because the valves were all sprung and the gauge glasses broken. The escaping steam gave us no chance to do anything. There was no great crash as the engine dived into the soft bank. Other interviews. Mr. William Aitken, Traffic Inspector of Glasgow and South Western Railway for the district, interviewed by one of our representatives, stated that he was informed of the occurrence shortly after it happened. He at once proceeded on a special engine to the scene, along with Messrs. Peter Kerr, Station Master at Prince's Pier, James Kerr, Locomotive Superintendent, and John Law, Goods Superintendent. They made arrangements for the removal of the bodies to the mortuary. Regarding the disaster, Mr. Aitken said that the deceased driver must have been an experienced servant and acquainted with the road, or he would not have been sent back to Glasgow in charge of an engine. At Cartsburn Junction, the rule was that if a driver running straight for Glasgow found that the right-hand signal was against him, he blew the whistle once, and if then informed that he was to make way for another engine or train, he went to the James Watt dock line. The engine that was buried, Mr. Aitken said, was one of the newest and best class, and had been built at a cost of nearly £3,000. He did not think that it was much damaged, but it would probably be Tuesday before it was dug out and got on the rails. William Thompson, guard, 15 Brougham Street, Greenick, was also interviewed. He stated that he was guard on the train of empty carriages that was taken to Greenick by the engine in the charge of the deceased driver, Gibson, early on Sunday morning. On arrival at Prince's Pier, Gibson remarked to Mr. Thompson that they had had a fine run from the city. Gibson then had his engine uncoupled from the empty carriages and, after taking water, left on his fatal journey. Thompson knew deceased as a quiet young man. That was the second run Gibson had made to Greenock that Saturday. The guard of the train that left Prince's Pier station for Glasgow last night stated that he was very well acquainted with Gibson. All last week and up to Sunday morning, deceased was the driver of the train on which he, the speaker, was guard. The train ran between Hurlford and Ardrossan, and that, he understood, was deceased's usual run. He always considered him a likeable chap, and knew that he had only been married for about 7 months. William Auld, who was acting as night pilot at Prince's Pier station early on Sunday morning, took the carriages from Gibson's engine and spoke to him before he left with the intention of taking the engine to Glasgow. Auld is also said to have observed the two men walking about the station buildings after the departure of the last train for Glasgow. They were both young looking, but he knew none of their names. At the scene of the accident, the news of the disaster spread quickly through the district yesterday forenoon, and in the course of the day large numbers visited the spot, which is at the foot of Inchgreen Street and close to the gasworks. A breakdown gang from Hurlford, under the charge of Mr. Manson, arrived at an early hour, and operations were at once started with a view to having the tender and engine drawn up onto the line on the embankment. Notwithstanding the powerful appliances used, the efforts were unsuccessful. A huge travelling crane was brought into requisition, 2 locomotives being stationed in the rear. Attention was first given to the tender, which had been uncoupled from the engine, but on several occasions the chain snapped. The operations were watched with considerable interest by the spectators. The engine, which weighs about 50 tons, is one of the newest class, while the tender weighs about 30 tons. Neither seems to be seriously damaged, although the levers and other fittings on the engine are considerably bent and twisted.
Very comprehensive.
Yeah, they seem to be quite glad that their £3,000 new engine might be able to
Might still work. Yeah.
be continued in operation on the line, so that's nice. Shame for the men though.
Yeah, the idea of just like being forced into like this furnace and then just being smashed by all this masses of like tons of coal coming behind it, and then like even the driver surviving that he'd probably rather they hadn't, like just sat there in steam, like mangled and stuff, just nasty stuff. But next up anyway, here we got the Scotsman, Wednesday 16th of May. Railway smash near Falkirk, 1 person killed and several injured. A railway smash resulting in the death of 1 person and the serious injury of several others took place near Falkirk last evening. Circumstances connected with the accident are that William Scaife, relief driver at Grahamston in the employment of the Caledonian Railway Company, left Grangemouth about 4:40 with an engine and tender to go to Greenhill. When he arrived at Grangemouth Junction, a quarter of a mile to the east of Grahamston Station, he observed that the line stood clear for the passenger train leaving Edinburgh for Grahamston and the north at 4:05. Scaife attempted to stop his engine, but somehow he failed to accomplish his purpose, and he ran onto the crossing in front of the passenger train. At the crossing, which connects Grangemouth branch line to the main line, the Grangemouth engine and tender met the passenger train, and on brushing past it got a severe blow from the Grangemouth engine, which sent the passenger engine off the rails with some of the carriages. The passenger engine ploughed its way through a sleeper fence and came to a standstill in a piece of vacant ground on the south side of the main line. There were a good few passengers in the Edinburgh train. The fire carriage was completely wrecked, but as the front of the Grangemouth engine got twisted by the impact, that saved the other carriages from being similarly smashed. Immediately after the collision, there was a great escape of steam from the Grangemouth engine, and the passengers in the compartment opposite it suffered fearfully. The steam poured in on the passengers, and a girl about 11 years of age was scalded to death. Her name is unknown, but she joined the train at Manuel and seemed to be a schoolgirl. A woman named Jane Morrison, who was going to serve at Larbert House, was severely scalded and was taken to Falkirk Cottage Hospital, while a man named John Finlay, residing in Chira House, Perth, was severely injured by steam. The driver of the passenger train, William Preston, Gardiner's Crescent, Edinburgh, had his left leg hurt, while George Dick, Fowler Terrace, Edinburgh, the fireman, together with the driver and fireman of the other engine, escaped uninjured. The girl was taken to Falkirk Mortuary, where the body awaits identification. The face and chest were very much disfigured. The accident was of such a character that the wonder is there was not a greater loss of life. The passengers, who naturally received a severe shock, got out of the train and walked to Grahamston Station. Their luggage followed them, and they were subsequently conveyed to their destination. Both the up and down main line from Edinburgh to the north were blocked, and much of the traffic was diverted. A breakdown gang was telegraphed for from Cowlairs, but owing to the position of the engine and the carriages of the passenger train, much difficulty was experienced in putting matters right. Later information is to the effect that the girl who was killed is Florence Embla Leslie, 8 years of age, daughter of Andrew Leslie, signalman, Bowness Junction, Manuel. She left home to catch the 4:20 train for Falkirk, where she was receiving music lessons. Well, that's nasty. I mean, just being scalded, you know.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to die. Dundee Evening Telegraph, Wednesday the 16th of May, fireman killed by an express. Last night an engine fireman was killed by an express train on the Lanarkshire and Dumbartonshire Railway. End of article.
Okay. So next I got the Scotsman, Friday 18th of May 1900, the railway accident at Falkirk. William Scaife, engine driver, Grangemouth, in the employment of the Caledonian Railway Company, who had charge of the Grangemouth engine, which collided with the 4:05 p.m. train from Edinburgh near Grahamston on Tuesday, was arrested yesterday on a charge of running past the signals and thus causing the death of the girl, Florence Leslie, daughter of a railway signalman residing at Manuel, who was a passenger in the train and who was scalded to death by the steam escaping from the engine. Scaife was afterwards liberated on bail of £50. The woman named Jane Mason, belonging to Pennycook, who was in the compartment in which the little girl was and who was also severely scalded, is still in the Falkirk Cottage Hospital, and although suffering severely from her burns, she is progressing favourably, as can be expected.
It's another
Follow-up,
like potential fear, I guess, of being a railway employee. It wasn't just that you yourself might get injured or killed on the railway, but that you might be held responsible for a passenger getting injured or killed on the railway. Especially pointsmen and signalmen, and that tended to be more in line for these things after collisions. But you have to remember, these employees of the railway were the authorities on the line. They were in charge of keeping their passengers safe, regardless of whether the companies were helping them in that respect or not.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility being a signalman as well, you know. The amount of steel and, you know, burning coal and, you know,
just tons of traffic.
Yeah, just it's crazy amount of responsibility there. And I don't know how long the shifts were, but you can imagine some of them are probably quite strung out.
Well, even in I don't know what year we're up to now. Is it like 1909 or something? I mean, they're still trying to get 8-hour shifts at this point. From the looks of things, in England and Wales, railway workers were restricted to 8-hour shifts, but not so much in Scotland. You had people working 10, 12 hours, which wasn't obviously conducive to safety.
No.
So a very small follow-up in the Greenick Telegraph and Clyde Shipping Gazette for the Friday the 18th of May. The scene of the accident at Inch Green had its interest for photographers, and, besides amateurs, the half-buried engine and tender were taken by camera representatives of various newspapers who did not wait till Sabbath was over. So that they were still expecting to respect the Sabbath at this point seems a little old-fashioned, even for 1900.
Okay, so next up, we've got Port Glasgow Express, Friday 18th of May, the railway disaster at Inch Green. Excellent photographs of the disabled engine taken by Mr. Norman Hunter on sale at Miller's, 71 Princess Street, 6d each.
Sixpence.
Sixpence. I was waiting to be corrected there.
Yeah. That's just an example of, you know, the sales of the photos of the Greenick incident. Parliamentary report, not a very glowing one for one of their members in particular. From the North British Daily Mail, Friday the 18th of May, Mr. Renshaw's industry. The representative of West Renfrew in the House of Commons is displaying an industry which deserves the careful attention and consideration of his constituents. No one can be more industrious than Mr. Renshaw when class interests come into conflict with the interests of the public. As a champion of landlords and railway directors in opposition to public requirements, he has highly distinguished himself within the last fortnight. In Committee on the Bill for the Prevention of Railway Accidents, his harassing hostility to the proposed legislation has been greater than that of any other member. The bill is a weak one for its purpose. Nothing else could be expected from a Tory government. Yet Mr. Renshaw has tried to make it weaker still. His course of action has been in the interest of the railway companies and against the interest of the railway servants. It is for the employers that he has fought, even on the question of the prevention of accidents to employees, and he himself is one of the employers, being a director of the Caledonian Railway Company and of the Paisley and Barrhead Railway Company. Mr. Renshaw moved amendments to limit the operation of the bill to certain classes of servant, to restrict the power of the Board of Trade, to require the use of appliances and plant calculated to reduce danger to persons employed on railways, to put obstacles in the way of inspection by officers of the board, to prevent the application of the bill to railways worked under lease, and to confine the powers of the board in regard to experiments to the one subject of automatic couplings. Fortunately, the one-sidedness of his advocacy was so obvious that his destructive proposals were resisted by the independent members of the committee, Tories as well as Liberals. Even the President of the Board of Trade, as representing the government, felt it necessary to oppose the efforts of Mr. Renshaw to cripple this bill for the prevention of accidents, and consequently all the mischievous amendments of that industrious railway director were defeated. It would have been a public scandal if the efficiency of a measure for the protection of the lives and limbs of the railway workers had been lessened by the action of one of their employers in his position as a Member of Parliament, and it was not to do this sort of work that the electors of West Renfrew sent Mr. Renshaw to the House of Commons. On Wednesday last, in the House itself, the same class interests were brought to the front again in opposition to the Scotch Access to Mountains Bill. That very desirable and useful measure was talked out by Mr. Renshaw, who in the matter of talk can go on like the brook, whatever else he can do. He did his best to defend the indefensible exclusion of the public from mountain and moorland, and in the course of his talk against the time, he made the interesting statement that there were many moorland districts in the neighbourhood of big towns like Glasgow, Greenock, Ayr, Perth and Dundee, where there was a large urban population, and that the effect of passing legislation of this kind would be absolutely destructive to the uses to which that moorland property was put at the present time. This present uses are the preservation of game and the pasturage of sheep. There would have been no interference with these uses if the bill had been passed, as it contained ample safeguards. Mr. Renshaw's mention of Greenock is illuminating. There is a moorland estate up among the hills behind Greenock, and it happens that the owner is Mr. Renshaw. In opposing and killing the bill, he fought for his own interest against the public interest. The electors of West Renfrew sent him to Parliament to represent them. In these things, he has not represented his constituents, but has represented purely class interests, and it is evident that a change in the representation of the constituency is necessary. So he is being properly called out in the press there for his failures to do what he was voted to do, you know.
Yeah, real opportunist, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we got Linlithgowshire Gazette, Friday 18th of May, fatal accident near Dalmeny. While the goods train was passing en route from Sighthill to Perth via Forth Bridge on Tuesday night, the fireman was killed. The stoker, David Miller, 28, married and living at Cowlairs, was at work on the tender when he came in contact with a bridge over the line between Kirkliston and Dalmeny stations. Death was instantaneous.
Yeah, this is once again the firemen, the stokers would have to get up on top of the tender to check a thing. There weren't gauges in the trains at this point, though that becomes a matter of subject for parliamentary reports, is the fitting of gauges so that they don't have to get up on top of the tenders anymore to check whatever it is they need to check up there, because too many of them were coming in contact with overhead variousness that the train normally would have missed.
Yeah, that's like the equivalent would be like putting the petrol gauge of a car on the roof, like poking your head out the roof rack, trying like the sunroof just to check how much fuel you've got left, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So that did get better in the time that I've been doing it. That did kind of get a wee bit better.
We're witnessing the sort of fixing of a lot of these problems over the course,
Yeah, it's a good time to be taking railway incidents from, is 1900, because a lot of real changes were in the making. Our next article is from the Ardrossan and Saltcoats Herald from Friday the 18th of May again. We have Ardrossan man killed at Greenick. The feeling of sadness and regret aroused in the west of Scotland generally by the terrible railway accident which occurred at Greenick in the early hours of Sunday morning was deepened here by the knowledge that John Glendinning Jr. of Ardrossan was one of the 4 men killed. Briefly, the circumstances of the accident are these. A light engine and tender left Prince's Pier for Glasgow at 2:30 a.m. with driver and fireman on board, and 2 other persons believed to have been passengers who had been in Greenock in consequence of the visit of the Channel Fleet and had missed the last train to Glasgow. Presumably through the mistake of the signalman at Cartsburn Box, the engine was turned into a branch line running alongside the James Watt dock. The locomotive rushed downhill at a terrific pace and, reaching the end of the line, crashed into a pile of sleepers and, clearing about 10 yards of ground, buried itself in the embankment. The men seemed to have been thrown against the furnace door, the falling coal from the tender rendering escape impossible. Assistance was not long forthcoming, but the unfortunate men were beyond human aid. The fireman and the 2 others were dead. The engineman was still living, but he died after uttering a request to those near him to shut off the steam. John Glendinning was the fireman. He was the son of John Glendinning, one of the best known passenger guards on the Ardrossan section. Young John was employed for some time as coachman to Dr. Allen, but subsequently entered the service of the railway company and had been lodging in Glasgow for some time. He was only 18 years of age. The news was broken to the bereaved father on Sunday night by Mr. Frew, station master, and Mr. Nisbet, night locomotive foreman. The body was buried in Ardrossan on Tuesday, when a short funeral service was conducted in the Free Church by Reverend R. M. Adamson. The sympathy of the community goes out in warm and full measure to the mourning parent and family. So just more roundups from the Greenock incident.
Okay, so next up we got Elgin Courant and Morayshire Advertiser, Friday 18th of May. Sad accident. Much sympathy is expressed here for Mrs. Tom, lately resident on Deskford Street, who left Cullen last November to reside in Glasgow with her son, who supported his widowed mother. This son, John Tom, aged 21 years, has met a sad death. He was a driver, and after uncoupling his engine from a workman's train at Kilbowie station in connection with the Caledonian Railway, he was struck on coming out by the Rutherglen Express to Bullock and decapitated. Oof.
Oh, that ended on a
quite
sharp note,
sharply.
didn't it?
Yeah.
Falkirk Herald, Saturday the 19th of May, accident to a miner, because remember collieries used the same kind of system as the railways. On Friday night last, a miner named Patrick Kelly, residing in Low Portland, Lithgow, met with an accident while proceeding to his work at Champfleury. At the time of the accident, Kelly was walking along the railway embankment to join the workman's train. It happened that some women were on the embankment at the same time, and he was warning them to look out lest they might get hurt when he himself was struck by the pilot engine, which had been taking a flying shunt, and had his leg broken. He was conveyed home and attended to by Dr. Mackenzie, who ordered his removal to the Royal Infirmary. Well, I mean, that's just irony.
It's ironic, yeah.
Warning others just before you yourself end up.
At least he only broke his leg, I suppose.
You going to come here?
You gonna?
Your dad can't see if you're in the way.
Cheers, darling.
Me?
So next up, we've got the Scotsman. Monday, 21st of May. Fatal railway accident in Aberdeen. A railway platform porter at Aberdeen named John Dean Smith, 21, died in the Royal Infirmary on Saturday afternoon from the result of injuries he received while shunting at the station.
More shunting.
Shunt, shunt, shunt.
Always with the shunting or special trains. Dundee Evening Post from Monday the 21st of May gives us good guard killed in Midlothian. John Anderson, a goods guard in the employment of the North British Railway Company and residing at 47 St Leonard Street, Edinburgh, was accidentally killed while shunting his train at Niddrie West Goods Station on Saturday afternoon. The train was being propelled to the down loop in the South Yard, and deceased, having given the signal to move the train, was attempting, after the train had started, to regain his van when his foot slipped on the step and he fell amongst the wheels. He leaves a widow and a number of young children.
Okay, so next up we've got North British Daily Mail, Monday 21st, guard run over at Portobello. On Saturday afternoon, John Anderson, goods guard, was killed on the North British Railway at Niddrie West Goods Station. He was engaged shunting his train, which was being shoved backward by the engine, and on trying to clamber into his van at the end of the train, he fell and was run over. His right shoulder and side were smashed up and his head cut. Death was instantaneous. The fireman on the engine had noticed the accident and stopped the train. The body was sent home. Anderson lived at 47 St Leonard Street, Edinburgh, and leaves a widow and 7 children.
7 children there.
Right shoulder and side were smashed up.
Yeah.
Just
it's probably worse than
that
you're imagining, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right. The Greenick Telegraph and Clyde Shipping Gazette for Monday the 21st of May. Larbert Porter killed. William Marshall, 52 years old, goods porter, Larbert, was accidentally killed at Dundee yesterday. It seems that with a view of visiting his relatives in Hilltown, Dundee, he joined the midnight mail at Larbert. On reaching Dundee, while the train was in motion, he jumped from the carriage to the platform and, stumbling, fell heavily on his head. He was picked up unconscious and, being carried to his relative's house, expired. Deceased leaves a widow and grown-up family.
Okay. Hello.
No. Yeah? Someone wants a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wants it.
So next up we got Greenick Telegraph and Clyde Shipping Gazette, Thursday 24th of May. Serious accident to a boy, fall over a bridge. Shortly after 8 o'clock last night, a boy named Matthew Beath, aged 9 years, and son of Archibald Beath, joiner, 87 Wellington Street, met with a serious accident in Brackleston Street. It appears that he was amusing himself by climbing on the railing of the railway bridge there, when he lost his balance and fell over onto the line, a distance of nearly 20 feet. He was happily picked up by Constable Mackenzie and Thompson a few minutes before the arrival of a train from Glasgow. Beath received a fracture of the left arm and also sustained severe injuries to his back. He was afterwards removed home, where he had his injuries attended to by a doctor. I mean, it's quite nasty, but he was okay, I guess.
Yeah, it was seen, and he's been literally rescued just before a train came. That could have been so much worse.
Yeah.
So, no, I think he can count his lucky stars. We have the East of Fife record for Friday the 25th of May. Fire on a railway train. About 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, a goods train of 13 wagons arrived at Drem Station. 4 of the wagons were on fire, and 2 barrels of whisky, household furniture, etc. were destroyed. The fire was put out by taking the wagons under the engine water supply pipe. The wagons were left behind at the station. 4 passenger expresses from Dunbar were kept back fully half an hour. This was really common. I posted an article that I'd come across to Twitter where a guy had been sent to pick up dynamite, explosives, for maybe mining work, colliery work somewhere, and it's exploded. It's been lit on the train, so the train was on fire as it came into the station. People on Twitter were going, they're talking about this as if it was like a daily occurrence, that this was just the normal, trains on fire. It's like, yeah, wow. It really was. The steam is coming out, right? But you also had sparks and things coming out as well. And if you had particularly dry, flammable wagons and these sparks were landing on them, they went on fire, you know. St Andrew's Station went on fire a number of times from trains just passing through it. Sparks just setting fire to the wooden surrounds and that. It's really common.
And we're a wet country. I mean, it rains a lot in Scotland. Can you imagine a super arid, dry place with all these steam trains knocking about? It's probably more common, you know.
Yeah, I would think so.
So next up, we got Motherwell Times, Friday, 25th of May, fatal railway accident. On a Sunday forenoon, a young man named John Cowan, who resided at Milton Street, met with a fatal accident within the Caledonian Railway Company's locomotive sheds. He was employed as a washer-out, and while at work was reaching out between 2 engines to get a match from a fellow workman when he was jammed between the buffers. He died from the effects of his injuries on Monday morning. Wow, a guy handing him a match would not soon forget that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty weird accident. Just a short note from the House of Parliament. It's from the Dundee Courier, Friday 25th of May. The Railway Accidents Bill, a largely attended meeting of railway directors, railway managers and members of Parliament was held yesterday afternoon in one of the committee rooms of the House of Commons upon the subject of the Accidents to Railway Servants Bill. It was agreed not to oppose the parliamentary progress of the bill, which is good. Any progress was good when it came to the railways, really.
It's nice we're seeing lots of it. So Barhead News, Friday 25th of May, railway accident. On Monday night, an accident, which might have had serious consequences, occurred on the railway rather more than a mile above Neilston. When the train from Kilmarnock, which is due in Barhead at 8:30, was nearing Shilford Bridge, one of the wheels in the third carriage from the engine seems to have broken, with the result that the carriage left the rails, pulling the one in front and the guard's van with it. The derailed carriages were first dashed against the wall at the side of the cutting, and then swinging to the other side were thrown on top of the upline, over which they were dragged for quite a quarter of a mile before the engine was pulled up. Fortunately, only 3 persons were in the carriages affected, and by a kind of miracle they all escaped with nothing more serious than bruises and a severe shaking. For some time traffic was pretty much disorganised, the permanent way being badly cut up.
I think some of these accidents, even the ones where people escaped just with a bit of a shaking, etc., I mean, they were probably such as would rival some of the more exciting action scenes in movies.
Yeah.
I mean,
that sounds like,
what I had in my head of like these carriages all being ripped off, and that just sounds like it was horrible. And then you find out that there were 3 people in it. You're like, oh my word! But they were okay.
So yeah, they're fine. Wonder what the doctor describes for shaking up. You know.
Yeah, just a bit of a shaking. Yeah.
Some aspirin. Probably whiskey.
Brandy.
Brandy. Medical brandy. That's right. Of course.
Dundee Evening Post, Saturday the 26th of May, gives us a shocking fatality at Monifieth. A child killed on the railway this afternoon. A sad accident happened this afternoon at Monifieth. The infant son of Alexander Edwards, signalman, strayed onto the line at Lyle's Crossing. a little to the west of the railway station, and the 2:30 train from Dundee struck the child and killed it instantaneously. The body was removed to a waiting room at the station, and Dr. Sinclair Smith was called. The child was about 2 years of age. So that sounds a wee bit like from last month's we had a similar thing where the child had been brought to work by its parent, possibly just through a complete lack of childcare options or other alternatives, and it's made it onto the line. I would think probably out of curiosity. I think that's the main reason children do anything, isn't it?
There's always so many noises and, bursts of steam and fire and sparks that
young boys and trains, man. They want to get close to them. They want to get in about them.
It'd be easy enough to lose track, what with all the distractions. So next up we got Dundee Evening Telegraph, Monday the 28th. Fatal railway accident in Edinburgh. Andrew Wilson, a surfaceman employed by the North British Railway Company at Haymarket West, was, while engaged at his work on Saturday, knocked down by an engine. He was taken to the Royal Infirmary and died yesterday morning. It was a Caledonian Railway engine which knocked the man down. That's
the last sentence. It almost sounds as if they're like, oh, well, I mean, this is where the blame was.
Yeah, it sounds like a shaming.
It was this company, they did it, they're responsible.
Just
strange way to put it, isn't it?
You know.
Dundee Evening Post for Tuesday 29th of May. It's another parliamentary report. The Railways Prevention of Accidents Bill is gradually fighting its way through Parliament, and if it comes through the ordeal unmutilated by the pruning knife of railway interests, it should prove a useful measure in the protection of both public and railway employees. Still, much more can be done to guard the railwayman at work. Already he is protected by a long list of stereotyped company regulations, but the point is, have the companies taken stringent enough measures to ensure the observation of these regulations upon all occasions? It is to be feared that in too many cases the rules are more honoured in the breach than in the observance, and that too with the connivance of officials. What is wanted is that the present regulations should be really operative and not merely serve the purpose of shielding the companies at fatal accident inquiries. So what they're saying there is that even the regulations that are in place, a lot of times those are subverted by the connivance of officials. So it'll have been to save money or because they didn't have the staff to cover a thing that an exception has been made in whatever case, which can obviously lead to accidents,
Yeah, kicking and screaming because they were told to reach into their pockets. Usual. So Dundee Courier, Tuesday 29th of May. The Scottish Railway Companies have notified their agents that they have withdrawn the rule which came into operation on the 1st of this month, requiring them to charge at parcel rate for all produce and provisions conveyed by passengers when it exceeded £7. This will now come under the luggage rule, allowing £60 weight per parcel. The companies have thus had to give effect to the loud outcry made against their new regulation.
The Edinburgh Evening News from Tuesday 29th of May. We have alarming railway accident at Larbert Station. Yesterday afternoon, just after the 4:13 passenger train from Perth to Glasgow Buchanan Street had resumed the journey from Larbert Station, the last carriage, which was a third composite, by some means jumped from the rails, and the wheels taking a loop line, the carriage tilted over, but fortunately did not fall on its broadside. There were 9 passengers in the carriage who, when they were extricated, were found to be suffering from little more than a severe shock and were able to proceed in their journey. Through the energy of Mr. Smith, the assistant station master, traffic was not seriously delayed. So that's nice.
Okay. So next up, Edinburgh Evening News, Wednesday 30th of May. The fatal accident at Grangemouth. Harry Jones, signalman at Grahamston, who has been arrested in connection with the recent fatal railway collision there, is a young man of high character, married, and resides in Falkirk. The charge is that he neglected to carry out the railway block regulations, it being alleged that he should have had his points set for slowing the Grangemouth engine onto another line before taking it onto the block system. Jones's arrest does not minimise the charge against the driver of the Grangemouth engine, Scaife, who has also been arrested, as the signals were against him, although the points were wrong.
All kinds of muck-ups there for that one. And our last article for this month is from the Dundee Evening Post, dated Thursday the 31st of May. Today the Highland Railway train from Keith, which arrives at Elgin at 12:15, ran down a man who was walking on the railway near Elgin and killed him instantaneously. That's all that article gives us. So I would assume that in June's roundup we'll maybe have further information as to who he was and where he was headed. Why
Maybe it'd be the first story.
Yeah, maybe.
Remember that one.
So
I'd say remember his name, but it's just a man.
There's no name.
Just a guy. Just
He will likely be identified later on. So that is us for May 1900. If you got through this one alright, we may see you for June. Possibly.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Yeah, it was quite a long one. Yeah. Obviously, having the Greenick incident, that's one that's still talked about. So.
Yeah. No, it was such a big one as well. It's not surprising that they drew it out, like in coverage, you know.
And I think Zara's wanting some attention from all the noises and
the cat's
wondering about
quite excitable tonight.
We'll maybe see you for June 1900, so take it easy.
Cheers.
Bye bye.